apologize for that. They are mowing the lawn and it is exceptionally loud. Okay, so our next speaker is Isabel Kaeslin, and yeah, Isabel, take it away. You're ready to go. Thank you.
Thank you. I just shared a handout in the chat. I don't know whether you've seen it. Great. So in case someone hasn't gotten it during the talk, I'm not able to look at the chat. If someone else could like reshare, that would be great.
So share this.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, just interrupt me if something's not working technical wise. So yeah, my talk is called Attention and Hermeneutic Gaps and Distortions. And the question that occupies me is, what exactly are we doing when we fill hermeneutic gaps or correct hermeneutic distortions? Oh yeah, now I can see you guys anymore. Okay, great. Good. So, and I'm working with Miranda Fricker's notions here from her 2007 book. And also when it comes to the term hermeneutic distortion, I take that from Rebecca Mason's addition to the conversation, just from a publication last year. So I'm starting out from their notions. And as you might have noticed, I'm only looking at hermeneutic, the hermeneutic side of epistemic injustice. I don't have as yet much to say about testimonial injustice. So this is about hermeneutic injustice. And what I argue is basically that recent developments in research on attention can help us here, can help us understand what we're doing or trying to do when we fill hermeneutic gaps or correct hermeneutic distortions. And that is why I'm first going to tell you in very, very rough terms a little bit about what research nowadays says what attention is. So there are many different accounts on attention, and there's basically no feature on it about attention that everyone would agree on. But I take my starting point from Sebastian Watzl's account because I think it brings together some strengths of many of them and is empirically well founded. So take this as a starting point. And in a very rough way, he says attention is something like a foregrounding and backgrounding of mental content. So by attending, we create priority structures in our stream of consciousness or just in our perception. So for example, when I attend to the slippery sidewalk I'm walking on, I foreground the ice and snow on the sidewalk, and I background the person, maybe the person who's trying to sell me a ticket to a tourist attraction. That's what I do when I pay attention. And there would be much more to say about this, but that's the essence of Sebastian Watzl's account, which has its roots in certain phenomenological accounts on attention that are much older. So attention is the mental activity of bringing certain things in the foreground and others in the background. And that's what Watzl says, at least. And I add to this account, because I'm not fully satisfied with it, I add to this account that a mere structuring into foreground and background doesn't seem to be a sufficient description of what's going on in attention. To me, it seems like that's what we call consciousness or perception. Having our mental content structured into foreground and background, or the activity of foregrounding and backgrounding, to me, seems what we just do whenever we're conscious, not when we pay attention actively. And what I say then is, what is special about attention, so attentively being conscious, as it were, what is special about attention is that we do this foregrounding and backgrounding in a special way. We foreground and background differently when we pay attention. And we do this in a especially vigilant way. That is, being vigilant means we look out for something to strike us. We look out for something to become salient to us. So we're not just like, passively foregrounding and backgrounding. We actually keep our mind to what could happen, what could become salient, as it were. So I say that this looking out for, this vigilance, comes in two different forms. There's two different ways, as it were, of paying attention. There's two different ways of being especially vigilant in the way we foreground and background. And one is focused and the other is open-minded. Focused attention is a looking out for something specific. So if I look, for example, I just specifically look out for green things in my visual field, that's focused attention. And open-minded attention, on the other hand, is in a way the opposite. I do the opposite with the filters I have in mind, right? So for focused attention, I basically filter my visual field for something specific. I have a filter in my mind to only foreground green things, as it were. And for open-minded attention, I do the opposite in a way. I look out for the unknown or the unspecific. I am in a way holding back my habit of perception, my habits of perception. I hold back my expectations of what happens or what could become salient. I'm actively keeping my filters away, as it were. So open-minded attention means I'm very vigilant to what's happening. I'm very vigilant to the domain I'm paying attention to, but I'm exactly not looking for something specific, but I keep my mind open. So if a mind were to start especially looking out for green things or especially looking out for round things, paying open-minded attention would mean to keeping that away, being realizing, no, I want to see what's becoming salient by just paying attention to this domain, by not letting these filters narrow my focus of attention, as it were. So open-minded and focused attention, that's the very short run I can give you through the notion of attention I'm working with here. And now let's move on. What are hermeneutic gaps and distortions? I'm also going to keep this very roughly here because the audience here is very, very well versed in these concepts, I think, of hermeneutic gaps and distortions. What I am going to say is a hermeneutic gap, very roughly, is the case when we don't have a concept for an experience or a phenomenon. In Fricker's sense, a hermeneutic gap is due to structural gaps in society's hermeneutic resources, right? So that is, by paying more attention to some people's experiences than to other people's, the marginalized people's experiences tend to have more hermeneutic gaps in their experiences. And that is the reason for hermeneutic injustice. For this paper here that I'm presenting today, I'm mainly interested in what it means to fill a hermeneutic gap, whether or not the gap is the result of structural inequalities. So I take the notion of hermeneutic gap and I'm just thinking more generally about what it would mean to fill it, whether or not the gap has come about due to structural inequalities or not. But conversely, also, I take the agent of filling the gap, the hermeneutic gap, to potentially be an individual or a collective. So the process I'm going to describe, how we fill hermeneutic gaps, I think we can describe this process both how an individual would do this on their own or how we could do this as a collective. What I want to kind of say or do with this is to say attention is not necessarily an individualist concept either. And hermeneutic work is not necessarily a collective phenomenon either. So I'm aware that if I describe how someone would an individual would fill in a hermeneutic gap on her own, of course, concepts are always social in some sense, right? Like I can't, at least if you somehow believe there can't be something like a private language, of course, concepts are always social, but I don't necessarily need to be in a collective process to fill a hermeneutic gap, I think. And conversely, I can also, the cause for hermeneutic gap could also be that I, as an individual, happen to have a hermeneutic gap somewhere where this is not due to structural inequalities, but just because, I don't know, I have not been exposed to a certain narrative or a certain environment yet. So yeah, that much about a hermeneutic gap. And the hermeneutic distortion, that's where this is not from Miranda Fricker anymore. This is Rebecca Mason's addition or transformation of these notions. But very shortly, a hermeneutic distortion is the case when we have a concept for an experience or a phenomenon, but it turns out that this concept is ill-fitting. So for example, if we call instances of sexual harassment just flirting, then the concept of just flirting is a distorted concept for the experience or phenomenon at hand. And of course, the comments that I just made about the structural inequalities that are often the cause for hermeneutic distortions and so on, or for the distribution of hermeneutic distortions, apply here too. And whether or not this is an individual or collective phenomenon apply here too. I think we could think of the causes for hermeneutic distortions often socially caused, but we could also think of individual causes and individual process of overcoming hermeneutic distortions too. So this were, as it were, the most preparatory remarks. And now I want to somehow try to show you how I think the notion of attention, or what we now know about attention, can help us understand what we do when we fill hermeneutic gaps and correct hermeneutic distortions. And I'm going to start with correcting hermeneutic distortions. So again, very roughly, the idea is focused attention. What I've described before as focused attention is what we do when we correct hermeneutic distortions, and open-minded attention is what we do when we fill hermeneutic gaps. So I'm going to start out with correcting hermeneutic distortions, and saying that we do this by being attentive in a focused way, by focused attention. Attention, again, is a structuring into foreground and background where we are especially vigilant. Now, among the many things that we can organize into foreground and background are also our concepts with which we understand and name things around us. And it seems that concepts are part of the activity of foregrounding. With our concepts, we structure features of objects into foreground and background. By choosing our concepts, we choose what to foreground or what to emphasize about an experience, and what to background or what to de-emphasize about it. As Sally Haslanger puts it, quote, "Concepts help us organize phenomena. Different concepts organize them in different ways. It is important then to ask what phenomena does a particular framework highlight and what phenomena are eclipsed. What assumptions provide structure to this framework?" End of quote. That was from the Sex-Gender Distinction and the Social Construction of Reality, from Sally Haslanger. So I argue that in a hermeneutic distortion, a conceptual mistake is made. The conceptual mistake is the following. I use a concept that captures some features of the phenomenon. However, using the concept rather than a different one has wrong implications. That is, using the concept implies wrong logical relations to other concepts, or leaves out important logical relations to others. For example, if I use the concept flirting to capture an instance of sexual harassment, I leave out the important logical relation of the phenomenon to the concept of bad behavior. That is, when using the concept sexual harassment to capture the phenomenon, if we used the concept, the fitting concept sexual harassment to capture the phenomenon, we would automatically have the logical relation to the concept bad behavior included, because sexual harassment is a subset concept of the concept bad behavior. It's part of the concept of bad behavior, a way of being badly behaving. So by contrast, capturing the same phenomenon with the concept flirting leaves out that relation to the concept bad behavior. So in such a case, the problem is not just an empirical one, as it were. So the problem is not that I make a factual mistake of applying a concept to the wrong set of instances, right? The problem is rather that I imply the wrong things by using this concept rather than another, or that I leave out important implications by using this concept rather than another. I distort something. I distort the logical relations to other concepts by using this concept rather than another. So it's a conceptual mistake I make. That is, I cause as I just said, it causes a hermeneutic distortion by using a concept with the wrong logical relations to other concepts, distorting the implications that would do justice to the phenomenon. So in a way, to flip the direction of explanation, the goal is to find concepts for phenomena that capture all the implications and that leave all the right implications and that leave out any ill-fitting implications. In short, the goal is to find concepts with exactly the right logical relations to other concepts, and conceptual amelioration then means to replace concepts that have ill-fitting implication with those that have fitting and only fitting implications. So let us see how exactly our research on attention can help us understand this process. Focused attention, as I said, is foregrounding and backgrounding of mental contents, where one is looking out for something specific, for a specific feature within your stream of perception or experiences. And for conceptual amelioration, we need to determine which of the features of a phenomenon are the essential features. So this is now where the foregrounding and backgrounding comes in. For conceptual amelioration, we need to determine which of the features of a phenomenon are the essential features, the ones that then determine which are the right logical relations to the phenomenon, and which features should recede as non-essential in the background. That is, in order to find the most fitting concept, what we first need to do is to find the essential features of a phenomenon. So we need first to attend to the phenomenon in this focused way with the specified goal of finding the essential features and backgrounding the inessential ones. It is in a way a collecting of or bringing together of the essential features at once in the foreground in order to bring them clearly into view as a whole. And then, only then, we can find out what are the fitting logical relations to these foregrounded features, and on the basis of that, what concept we should give this phenomenon instead. So in other words, only once we have worked out the structure of a phenomenon, the web of its essential features, do we have a chance of capturing it under the right concept. In order to see the structure of a phenomenon, we need to engage in the activity of looking specifically for its essential features. So we have to engage in focused attention. Focused attention is the activity with which we lay open, as it were, the structure of essential features of a phenomenon so that we can then name it properly, or at least free it from its improper names or its improper concepts. So let us, for illustration, consider again the case when an instance of sexual harassment was called flirting. Before we can assess whether that is a fitting concept for the phenomenon attend, we need to attend in a focused way to the phenomenon. When attending to the phenomenon, we start dividing features of the phenomenon into essential and inessential ones. For example, the fact that a certain utterance is often considered a compliment, for example, the utterance, "your breasts are big," could sometimes are used to be considered a compliment. That is not an essential feature of the phenomenon. By contrast, another feature of the phenomenon is essential, that what has been said was a comment about the second person's body in a context where her body is not relevant. And another essential feature, for example, that we need to foreground is that bodily parts are considered personal and commenting on them oversteps personal boundaries. And yet another non-essential or inessential feature is that the first person who made the utterance did not have bad intentions when saying this. This is not essential, so that's going to be backgrounded when we do the work of correcting conceptual distortions. So once we have worked out this structure of the phenomenon, we have a web of essential and inessential features of the phenomenon at hand. We can then see the essential features together in the foreground, and on the basis of that, work out the fitting logical relations to them. So for example, that this set of essential features calls for a concept that must fall under the more general concept of bad behavior. Hence, we choose the concept harassment for it. So focused attention it does the work of preparing our understanding of the phenomenon in a way which then allows us to see the fitting logical relations. And now, let's see how attention, the other form of attention, open-minded attention, helps us understand what we do when we fill hermeneutic gaps. A hermeneutic gap, again, exists when we don't have any concepts to describe an experience. So Miranda Fricker originally thought of the case of Carmita Wood, the case of sexual harassment, as an example of this, of a hermeneutic gap. I've just used it as an example for hermeneutic distortion because that is Rebecca Mason's point, that there wasn't really a case that there was no concept, there was just a distorted concept, the concept of flirting for it. But now let's retreat to the original example that Miranda Fricker gave us. Let's imagine we are in a time where when Carmita Wood experiences what she experiences, there's no notion yet at all, no concept under which to capture, not even a distorted notion under which to capture her experience. So Carmita Wood was an employee who got sexually harassed before there was a concept for that behavior. Wood experienced something at her workplace that made her feel uncomfortable, but when asked what the problem was, she could not give it a name. Even though her suffering was strong, she simply did not have the words to make it intelligible to herself and to others what was going on. This led her to quit her job, and because she could not explain what the problem at her workplace was, she was not even eligible for unemployment compensation. So the goal in filling hermeneutic gaps of that kind is to figure out what an as yet unnamed phenomenon or experience is, so that we can create an appropriate concept to capture it. How does attention, open-minded attention now achieve this goal? Open-minded attention is an actively maintained state of being prepared to notice things while one does not know what will come up. One does not know what one is looking out for. It consists in an act of keeping one's expectations, habits, and filters away when looking for what will come up. That is, open-minded attention entails a form of sensitivity towards the unspecific. So this kind of attention is something like a pure act of keeping one's mind open, as it were, in that one keeps oneself prepared to notice things of whose nature one doesn't know yet anything. I'm actively waiting for something unknown, right? Actively waiting for something unknown to strike me. Note that the distinct kind of sensitivity involved here is not the same as just not currently having one's mind occupied by anything. On the contrary, it is an active keeping oneself open for something unknown to strike. One actively keeps other things out of mind in order to be prepared for something to come up. So I argue that this is exactly what we do when we try to fill hermeneutic gaps. That's what we do when we try to conceptualize something that's as yet unrecognized or unnamed. A not yet conceptualized phenomenon is a phenomenon of which we don't yet know what features to foreground and what to background, right? That is, we have to exercise open-minded attention, this looking out for the unspecific, looking out that keeps one's habits of perception away, so that the unexpected features of the phenomenon can even come into the foreground, so that they can even be noticed at all. Once we have paid open-minded attention to the phenomenon, we have assembled, as it were, the unexpected features of the phenomenon that would otherwise not even have come on the floor, and then we can conceptualize the phenomenon by deciding what features we should foreground and background. So we create an appropriate concept for it after we've paid open-minded attention for the unexpected features to even come to the fore. So to create a concept for a yet unrecognized phenomenon, to fill a hermeneutic gap, really is to pay open-minded attention to the phenomenon, really. So the point is here, features of an experience that are usually in the background or not even noticed can only become foregrounded if we pay this open-minded attention to them, if we create this specific keeping away of the filters that we usually have in our minds. That is, we need to inhibit our usual ways of foregrounding, our habits of perception, in order to conceptualize an as yet unconceptualized phenomenon, and so in order to fill hermeneutic gaps. It's only if but this kind of open-minded attention, just to have said this too, we only need this if we need to find the new as yet unrecognized features that we need for conceptualization. conceptualization. Once we have a concept, like even if it's a distorted concept, we don't need to go through this process of inhibiting our usual ways of foregrounding anymore. This is specifically only something we do when we fill a hermeneutic gap in the sense of not having anything to start out with, as it were. So the process that Miranda Fricker describes in her book about how she imagines hermeneutic gaps can be filled is a process of consciousness raising, right? Where a group of women come up together with the concept of sexual harassment in the end to capture that phenomenon. I think that what she describes there as consciousness raising can be understood as a collective form of paying open-minded attention. I think I'm going to stop here. So I'm not going to say more about how we understand consciousness raising as open-minded attention. It's a collective phenomenon. I have another paper about this, but I'm actually very curious what you think about what I've presented so far. So thank you very much.